There's plenty of anticipation for the March update coming to Destiny 2, at least for players who are currently engaged with the game, as really it's the main seasonal update that we get these days after an expansion. So, as we've seen and discussed, apparently, based on in-game teasers, the March 2026 major update will again focus on the Dredgen organization. There's a teaser to a weapon of shadowy legend, we don't really know what that is, but we could speculate. And otherwise, there may be a focus on a Hive weapons foundry and corrupted arsenal of weapons, so there's interesting narrative potential there, and we'll see other quality of life updates and content rollout as part of that major update. One of those components will be what Bungie refer to as a RAD event, so going back to their Frontiers blog post, they said, Into the Light introduced a raid boss rush event called Pantheon that put Fireteam's capabilities to the test. This event showed us that the community is hungry for new experiences that break out of the mold of the traditional raid and dungeon. So in the fourth major update of the year, which indeed will be Shadow and Order, they're planning for another event that introduces novelty and allows the team to experiment with legacy raid and dungeon offerings to create surprising aspirational challenges. And as we know, Pantheon was the first iteration of this. The second iteration was Rite of the Nine, which focused instead on dungeons. And that was particularly popular because on top of the kind of aspirational endgame component of it, there were also the solo guided, or what they referred to as explorer mode dungeons, which was a great opportunity for a lot of players to kind of experience that content for the first time in a more friendly capacity. And while we don't have confirmation of whether we'll see something like that again, rumors that came out around the time that Renegades dropped suggested we could see bosses from Scourge of the Past, Crown of Sorrow, and Spire of Stars return. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. I guess the important wording on Bungie's part is that they'd said legacy raid and dungeon content. How you interpret legacy at this point is the interesting part, because since old raid and dungeon weapons haven't been updated to the tier system, many of us would refer to them as legacy. But another side of it is that when Bungie actually announced this, we were still in the final shape year, so we hadn't got the tiering system yet. Salvation's Edge, for instance, wasn't a legacy raid at the time that this hit it, so they could essentially be referring to vaulted content, which would be things like Scourge of the Past. Although even if they are referring to things like Vault of Glass, Crowder's End, Salvation's Edge, or things like that, that's also a big positive, because you would assume that Bungie would then update at least some of the gear from those activities into the tiering system. But referring to the leaks that were posted at Renegades, which we shouldn't consider confirmed because they are not, they're still interesting, and this was shared by Colony Deeks, who also listed some info about Renegades before it actually dropped here. It suggests that we'll see the return of vaulted encounters, including Insurrection Prime, that was the boss from Scourge of the Past, Galron from Crown of Sorrow, and Valkaor, who was the Spire of Stars boss. And they also suggested that boss encounters will merge mechanics from previous encounters in those raids. And I guess something that potentially backs this up is that when we had the original Pantheon, the bosses there included Golgoroth, Caretaker, Macrocosm, Atrax, Oryx, Rolk, Riven, and Nezarec. So that obviously excludes those vaulted raids, but it also didn't include things like Salvation's Edge or indeed Desert Perpetual. So I guess those would be on the table as well, as potentially seeing dungeon bosses thrown into the mix somehow. Because when Bungie did announce this, they referred to it as a raid and dungeon event, which is sort of open-ended as to whether it will be raid or dungeon focused. Importantly though, in terms of this type of sort of endgame content, this will be an opportunity for Bungie to bring back weapons from those original releases in the tiered system. Of course, we were disappointed when Bungie brought back dungeon encounters to the portal that did not contain any of the original loot from those encounters. And I think it's safe to assume that if Bungie do a RAD event, they will indeed reprise some of the weapons from the original activities. And that's what we did see with Pantheon and Rite of the Nine. Looking at Scourge of the Past, we got weapons which were almost part of the Black Armory set, really. In particular, the shotgun threat level, which was a rapid-fire kinetic shotgun, was pretty popular. Most popular roles being Trench Barrel, Grave Robber. I'd be excited to Michael Scarn it up again. Other weapons from Scourge included Tempered Dynamo, that was a precision frame arc fusion rifle, No Feelings, which was an arc scout rifle in a precision frame, and Bellowing Giant, which was a Void adaptive frame rocket. There were some pretty cool weapons in there, and I think there'd be potential for Bungie to reprise some of them. I also think there'd be a huge amount of scope to actually rework some of the exotics from those encounters, like Anarchy from Scourge of the Past. Also, Anarchy never actually got a Catalyst, right? So I feel like that would be another big opportunity, as well as potentially even cosmetic treatments for these weapons, as was proven with the Praxic Blade. When you've got something that's really strong and popular in the sandbox, and you also add a strong cosmetic chase to it, that's really juicy for players, and Bungie should have been doing more of it for a long time, I think. But with the potential of Crown of Sorrow encounters returning, we had weapons like Galron's Right Hand. There was a high-impact frame kinetic auto rifle, the Calatia Noblesse, which was the high-impact frame Void Scout, and we had stuff like Emperor's Courtesy, which was the arc shotgun, and the Bane of Sorrow, the machine gun from that raid. Then looking at Spire of Stars, one of my favourite drops from that raid was the Luxurious Toast emote, the Callous one, which in a way does show you how far the game actually progressed from those days. That raid literally had 2 new weapon inclusions. That was the last of the Legion. I honestly had forgot these weapons ever existed. That was an adaptive burst kinetic sidearm. And the Emperor's Envy, which was the Void Precision Frame Fusion Rifle. And if indeed we were to get any of those, who knows, maybe there'd even be potential for Bungie to look at some of the other Leviathan weapons in general. Main opportunities I see with this is to bring back some of these weapons as actual tiered drops, right? But also potentially to introduce new perks, cosmetic components to the weapons, and maybe even increased accessibility for this content like they did with the Explore mode. I imagine that's far harder to do with a raid versus a dungeon, right? On a mechanics level, it's far easier to adjust a 3-player activity to be friendly for a solo player versus a 6-player activity to be friendly for a solo. So maybe we shouldn't hold our breath on that front, but if those are indeed going to be the featured pieces of content, we may actually see some pretty old endgame gear updated into the tiered system. As we said at the start though, pinch of salt, because Bungie haven't confirmed it yet. They have confirmed there will be a RAD event, but of course haven't given us the specifics yet, so we only really have the leaks to go on. Another potential positive for Shadow and Order though, given the reception around Ash and Iron. Firstly, most of us would hope that Bungie have been able to take some of that feedback on board to create a generally more interesting update, but also having the endgame event component in there as well will essentially mean that it's a more significant update than what Ash and Iron was. Having said all of that, when Edge of Fate released, Bungie did actually confirm some of what we get in Ash and Iron. Of course, there was Reclaim the Plaguelands, that was the new portal activity, and perhaps a Hive Weapons Foundry kind of falls into that slot. Maybe that's going to be the activity content in itself. Additionally, Ash and Iron did get the Heliostat exotic mission, albeit delayed a bit after the initial launch of the update. And Bungie haven't confirmed that we're getting a new exotic mission specifically for this major update, so for the moment, that is kind of speculative. This time around though, the addition that Ash and Iron didn't get, of course, is this RAD event component, so it could be that that's kind of eaten up more of the resources, and perhaps we won't get a new exotic mission this time around. We'll just have to wait and see. Just like you guys though, I sincerely hope that we start to get some detail about it soon. And it could be that the major update launch is kind of a platform to have the roadmap conversation, maybe even speak a bit more about some of the content we were anticipating getting in 2026. We say anticipating, Bungie did confirm Shattered Cycle should be dropping in 2026, so should The Alchemist. Just keep in mind that leaks also claimed, at least, that there was the potential for delays for the expansion content this year, so frankly, this is why players want the roadmap, but let me know how you think that will play out down in the comments section. Given that this drops on the 3rd of March though, I would anticipate in the next month we will finally get a few details about what this will be. So for today, I guess we've discussed the possibilities. As always, share your thoughts down below. I will keep you posted when Bungie get back to us with more info, so keep it locked and loaded. Plus, if you've enjoyed the video, a rating really does help us out as well. Otherwise though, cheers for tuning in, and I hope you have an awesome day.